good.
How many of you use Facebook every week in any way? Raise your hands. Me too. Almost everyone in the room. I'd like to show you a post that has appeared on Facebook. How many of you have seen this post? Raise your hand. Someone? Anyone? No one? I didn't either, because this post was targeted, and it wasn't targeted to me, and it apparently wasn't targeted to you. And if we look closer to this post, we could see that it is fake in so many ways. If you look just at the news that it's trying to spread, deadly viruses is spreading around Sweden, 40 people dead. That's fake. If you look at the logotype, SVT Nyheter, it's stolen from another news source. And if you look at why this post has appeared so that people have seen it, you could see that it's sponsored. If you're looking up on the top of the post, you can see that it's sponsored. So someone has paid money to make this post appear for people. Not for everyone, not for us in this room, but for certain people, selected groups in Sweden. Because this has actually been shown on Facebook just this fall. And when we see this, and when we see information like this, the question that should puzzle us all is why? Why would someone invest money in spreading this fake information? Why? Is this because they want to spread fear? Is it because they want to sell vaccines? Do they want to spread distrust into a trusted news outlet? Or is this just merely a joke? We don't know, and we will probably never know. But what we do know is that this method of targeting specific groups in society with customized information that may be true, may be false, may be half true, half false, this method is gaining influence and power all over the world. We have seen this method in use both in the American presidential election and in the Brexit campaign and in many other places. And in 320 days, we have an election in Sweden. So just take a minute, just take a short moment to think about that. Leading up to that election, who might try to target you? In what way? And with what kind of information? Just keep that thought in mind, because we will come back to that a little bit later. And meanwhile, let's take a moment to dig deeper into the concept of fake news. Fake news is used for a lot of things. It can mean many things. But I'd like to stress the four most important definitions of fake news. So the first definition of fake news is that it can be an outright lie or pure manipulation. A lie like the one that I showed you with the viruses spreading in Sweden. And I'm sure that you have seen manipulated photos from dramatic news situations like the terror attack in Stockholm at Drottninggatan a couple of months ago, for example. So the first definition of fake news is lies and manipulation. And the second definition of fake news is propaganda. While the facts presented might not be entirely false, the selection of facts and the presentation is biased. It doesn't give the entire picture. It doesn't want to give the entire picture. The whole purpose of the information is to influence public opinion in a certain direction. So the second definition of fake news is propaganda. And the third definition that I would like to stress is anecdotal evidence. I share an experience that I just had, and I make that single small experience evidence for an entire theory or a trend, a big trend in society. We see that a lot in social media, anecdotal evidence. And that would be the third definition of fake news. And the fourth definition of fake news is that people call it fake news simply because they don't like it. It doesn't support their views. So that would be the four definitions of fake news. It is lies and manipulation, it's propaganda, it's anecdotal evidence, and it's things that you simply don't like. You just don't want them to be there. You call them fake news. And if you're now digging deeper into the expression of fake news, we also have to dig into the actual word news. What is news? One definition of news is information not previously known to someone. But the term news is something more than merely just information. Someone along the line has curated the information, has validated it, investigated it, questioned it, looked at it from different angles, and that process is what we call journalism. The iconic journalist Carl Bernstein, he was one of the journalists that revealed the Watergate scandal some decades ago. And he has made sort of a poetic way of describing journalism. He once said that journalism is about searching the best obtainable version of the truth. Journalism is about seeking the best obtainable version of the truth. And if you have these definitions of fake news, and you have the definition of news, it's apparent that fake news has nothing to do with news. It's actually the opposite. So couldn't we just, from this very point, agree on never to use the term fake news? Because it has nothing to do with news. It's something else. And couldn't we just agree upon using the word that it really is? It's disinformation. It's not fake news. It's disinformation in many different ways. And if you look at the discussions recently in Sweden and in other countries, you might get the impression that disinformation is something new. But it's far from new. We see examples all throughout history of disinformation in many kinds. You could see in the 80s, for example, the Soviet Union, they tried to spread the rumor that HIV was actually invented and spread by the US. And they were quite successful. In many countries, that was a widespread rumor that HIV was actually invented by the US. And we have seen that throughout the centuries, disinformation spread. But there is a difference today. I would say that disinformation today is on speed. It's fueled by digitalization, by globalization, and by social media. In social media, we tend to take part of information in enclosed echo chambers, where our views are more confirmed than questioned. So, if disinformation is the disease, is there a cure? Well, I think that there are some remedies, and I will describe that later. But first, I want us to go back in history, to go back a little bit more than 250 years to 1766. A little bit more than 250 years, 1766. That was a brave year. That was actually a very brave year in Sweden, because that's the year when the Swedish Press Act was founded. Sweden was actually the first country in the world to protect the free press through this kind of regulation. And it really, really changed things. Political pamphlets were being distributed, books were being printed in new ways. Sweden has a proud history of being forerunners for democracy, transparency, and freedom of press. Well, aren't we enlightened? Don't we have a proud history? And yes, we have. But, because there is a big but, it only lasted 6 years. When King Gustav III he took over power by a coup. He repealed the Swedish Press Act and introduced a new one in which, no surprise, the king himself had the power to decide what was allowed to express in Sweden. Only 6 years. So what's the point with this story? What's the point of going back 250 years? Well, I think that the core principles of democracy, transparency, and freedom of press, the core Swedish principles, they are sort of in our DNA. They stand strong and they stand proud, and they have done that in more than 250 years. But, and here comes the but again, we must always remember that they have been challenged all throughout history. Not only after 6 years, but all throughout history. From the very beginning. People before us, our ancestors, they have needed to protect them. They have needed to fight for them. And that's precisely what we need to do today. The most dangerous thing we can do today is to take these principles for granted. Democracy and public conversation are being challenged also in our time. So let's go back to where I started, with the viruses spreading, 40 people dead in Sweden, all throughout the country. We have to be aware and we have to be alert when it comes and we will see new ways of spreading disinformation and when it challenges our society. It took Facebook an embarrassing long time to admit that they actually did play a part in the outcome of recent elections by not preventing disinformation to be spread on their platform. It was only after journalistic investigation and public outcry that some of the largest stakeholders, like Facebook, were starting to listen, were starting to take some action. And now they do, but we have to keep that pressure up. And at the Swedish election in 320 days, hopefully posts about fake viruses will either not show up or display a clearer origin, which will make them easier for the public and for journalists to investigate. And that leads to the core question: what can we do? All of us in this room, what can we do in this era, new era of disinformation? Well, first, as always, we have to start by looking at ourselves. It's very easy to think that echo chambers, that's something that other groups exist in. Other people, they are the ones who spread biased information, not me, certainly not my friends, certainly not the friends of my friends, not me. But it is a scientific fact where all of us in this room, we are less critical if we are subjected to information that we like. And secondly, we also have to check our sources. Don't share a disputable source. Just share good science, good journalism. Take pride in being informed and educated. And that leads to my third point. Although being informed and being well educated is great both for the individual and for society, according to recent studies, it's not a vaccine against disinformation, sadly. Staying informed is not enough. According to Dan Kahan, who is professor of psychology and law at Yale University, it can actually be the opposite. People with a good understanding of science can be more resistant to facts. They are stubborn on their ideas. So what type of person is the most resistant to disinformation? Dan Kahan, he talks about scientific curiosity. That kind of person, the scientific curious person, exists in all kinds of social classes and all levels of education. It's the kind of person who says, "Hey, I haven't seen this before. What could this be about? I need to know more." Scientific curiosity. That's what leads us to a healthier information diet. I work at SVT, the Swedish television, and every day at my workplace it's about finding creative ways to help the audience become more informed, but not just more informed, also more curious. And to try to make people more informed, that's sort of a key issue for all serious media, and certainly for a public service company. But we who work in the media, we need to do something more than that. We need to spark that curiousness so that people are triggered to find out more, to understand one another better, to be interested in another perspective. Curiosity, that might be the best driving force to form an information-healthy society. So, at last, even though it might sound trivial, find out what sparks your curiosity. Go talk to someone you have never talked before and listen to them. Really listen. Find a documentary that brings you to another world, that gives you the opportunity to explore another person's mind. Be skeptical about what you hear in the news. Be skeptical about what you see in social media, but also keep that curious 5-year-old kid that you once were close to your heart. Perhaps it's exactly that person that will secure our democracy. Thanks.